After a successful decade run as a featured documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios, Incorporated. Episode 13 of the Eyes of the Mothman podcast is here, and that is revisiting the field tape interview with Rick Meadows, who is from the Army Corps of Engineers, who we interviewed regarding the EPA cleanup at the McClintic Wildlife Preserve, also known as the TNT plant in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a crucial part of the story and telling of Mothman, because that is the landmark site where many of the Mothman sightings took place. That's where people went out to search for the Mothman, and it's where the theory of Mothman being a mutated bird comes from. Obviously, we're coming back to back. Episode 12 was with Ken, who another Army Corps of Engineer interview we did. If I'm not mistaken, Rick was Ken's supervisor, or I don't know how this works at the old military. It was not his boss, but his
superior.
Superior. That's the way you put it. Very by the book, straight to the point guys. We asked them very direct questions about just to try to get a better understanding of like what kind of chemicals were found out there. What was the level of chemicals in terms of the toxicity? What could some of the effects be? I remember both of these guys not really giving their opinion on what the effects in the environment could be, other than them being carcinogenic, which also made me go, oh, great. I'm glad we've been filming out there for the last 3 days.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions you have is why, because this was supposed to be a place where teenagers would go, all those kind of cement igloos where they kept the TNT. But this is where teenagers used to go to hang out and drink beers and fool around or whatever, and park. And so you have to ask yourself, why aren't the people becoming mutated? Why aren't they feeling the effects of all this?
Amazingly, what I found is that they were more concerned about people getting cancer instead of turning into Mothmen.
Yeah.
I will say, too, looking back on this, I think, it's a bit of a misunderstanding, misinterpretation of like what was going on out there. Because like, even when you start to learn the type of chemicals that were seeping into the environment there, they're not really, it's not like it's toxic waste. And I even myself made the mistake back then of talking almost in a generic sense about what could have happened out there. Like, oh, is it toxic? It's toxic in the sense that it's a pollutant, but it's literally not like a toxic waste. We're not talking about like the toxic Avenger. It's not a nuclear power plant. That's not the type of facility and pollutants that were going on out there. It's different chemical compounds used for explosives. And those are not really what you would expect to like mutate something. But I still had to go out there and interview and ask them because, again, it was one of the more popular theories of like what Mothman could have been.
Before I forget, let me just ask a question. Everybody has always described it as, a bird-like creature with glowing red eyes, and it's a half man, half bird and all this stuff. Where did they get moth from?
If I'm not mistaken, at the time, obviously, Batman comics were a big thing. And I believe maybe there was like a villain, like a Mothman character that was also kind of in that space. And I think the Mothman term was actually coined from popular, dime store novel, comic book type of thing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Obviously we're talking about the TNT area in McClintic Wildlife Refuge, which is an area that we went out and filmed in. What do you guys remember about, not necessarily the interview with Rick, but what about the being out and filming in McClintic?
Before we did the interviews with the government officials that, okay, this is where people say they were poisoned. This is like mutated frogs and a bird ate a mutated frog. And these are TNT plants. But, in my mind, it was like, kids used to play here. Teenagers used to come out here and bring their beer and make out and do whatever the kids do in order to get away from home. But then we interview the government people. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's totally toxic. It had to be cleaned up. It's poisonous. You can get cancer. And then it's like, all right, now let's go film there and get some B-roll. And it's just like, so we're going to go where the poison is.
Yeah, at the McClintic Wildlife Preserve, there are igloos. we went into a couple of the igloos, and I just it was like freezing in there, and there were still like remnants of things in there. It was pretty creepy, I thought. I don't know. I don't know if it was creepy because of all the stories that we were hearing, or if it's because I grew up in New York and now I was in like the woods and I was hearing animals. I don't know. I just remember being really creeped out about the whole area.
Yeah, it's strange. I mean, it's there's nothing familiar about it. You know, it's in the middle of the woods, and it's just
you're in the middle of the woods and you're in a cement igloo that's cold and moldy. It's just kind of like, let's go home. And
I was terrified that I was going to be left in an igloo and that the door was going to close and I wouldn't be able to get out. I was like, it was a weird fear of mine, so I was like scared to go into them.
I will say, too, a lot of the interviews we've talked about were like, oh, these people were very friendly and kind and you felt good. I'm not saying these guys weren't friendly. They were. But it wasn't as comfortable. It's because you're talking about an uncomfortable subject to begin with. I mean, but I found these interviews more uncomfortable than talking with people who had relationships like to Silver Bridge content. I just felt uncomfortable talking with them. It might have been a little bit deriving from the fact that, like, you know, it's out of my wheelhouse. I don't want to get deep into the like nitty gritty of like, you know, periodic tables and chemicals and what their effects are. Like, I didn't want to go that much into it. I wanted to treat it from a very generic standpoint, but I remember feeling uncomfortable talking to these guys.
Yeah, but everyone else from Point Pleasant, everyone was like warm and friendly and welcoming. And these people, they were nice. They were perfectly nice people. But there was nothing like warm about them because they were just very clinical. And
yes, clinical is a good way to put it. And I'm sure they have to be because, again, we're talking about, you know, stuff that are...
Yeah, they're not going to be stand-up comedians. I mean, they're just going to, you know, give you what you were asking for. They're engineers, for God's sake.
So Rick's interview was pretty quick and short and sweet, but it still, you know, has a place in our film for multiple reasons. And it might not be the most exciting interview as we look back, but it's still, you know, it was an important one. So hopefully you'll enjoy our interview with Rick Meadows from the Army Corps of Engineers about the EPA cleanup over at the McClintic Wildlife Refuge, also known as the TNT plant, and the first location of the Mothman sighting back in 1966.
Okay. Kind of thing to start out, can you just tell me your name and spell it for me? That way I have it on the...
Yeah. My name is Rick Meadows. That's R-I-C-K MEADOWS. I'm a project manager for the Huntington District Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay, great. So all the same rules you heard me talking. Just talk to me and repeat the question. It always helps. Can you just tell me what your involvement's been with the cleanup of the area out there?
My involvement at West Virginia Ordnance Works has been as a project manager. I'm responsible for the overall execution of the cleanup actions that we're taking. The Army Corps of Engineers is taking at the site to clean up contamination left on site from the former activities during production of TNT.
Can you tell me what are the procedures for cleaning up a site like this?
Yes, we start in the cleanup process. We start with what we call site investigation, and it goes through a series of processes that's just a quick look to see if there's any potential concerns in a given area. Then if we find something, we involve to a remedial investigation where we do more sampling and risk analysis and go into a feasibility study where we evaluate the best alternative to correct the problem and clean up the given area.
And can you tell me when the TNT plant area in the McClintic was first site surveyed? Can you tell me what was found?
After World War II in 1945, there was initial efforts to clean up site. They knew they had TNT contamination there because it was a TNT manufacturing facility. So the TNT and breakdown components of that, a dinitrotoluene or DNT would have been another contaminant found. But the major concerns was the TNT and the DNT that was in the soil and groundwater at the site.
So can you talk a little bit about that? It seems that, like, you know, a TNT plant, it doesn't even really warrant kind of like an investigation to see if there was problems there. Does it kind of come with the territory? Like, is it normal that TNT plants areas, like just throughout, kind of always have some cleanup procedures that are needed when they're kind of out of commission?
Yes, I mean, it's recognized that it can have a potential health risk or ecological risk, a risk to the environment. So it's normal processes now to go in and evaluate all of the formerly used defense sites and determine if there's any potential risk to human health or the environment.
And in terms of like the one at the McClintic area now, kind of in perspective to just the standard kind of cleanup procedure of the TNT area, does it kind of fit right along with what's expected? Was it worse? Was it less? Can you tell me how it kind of?
I don't know for sure how it rates overall across the nation with other facilities. I would expect that it's probably on the average since they were all very similar and a lot of them were designed by the same company and even built by the same company. So.
And do you know, I was just from Ken, after the plant shut down, I had heard just conflicting kind of facts about some of the igloos about them being leased to other companies and things like that. Do you know if they were, and if so, like what type of places were using them? What were they storing there?
There were 100 igloos on the site for storage of TNT during the production period. After the war and property was transferred to other locals in the state, 50 of those igloos were transferred to the state of West Virginia, with the exception of just a couple, which went into county ownership, and then the other 50 were transferred to American Electric Power Company. But now the West Virginia DNR leases that property back from them. And West Virginia DNR, they do lease out some of those igloos to companies for storage of gunpowder, black powder, and so forth. And the ones that are in private ownership are used for storage of munitions. And he also, the company there has a recycling facility, an ammunition recycling facility on site.
So the cleanup procedure that was going on there, that was all in direct relation to just TNT manufacturing. There wasn't any cleanup that was a result from any other things stored in the igloos from these private places, was there?
Correct. All the cleanup on the site was a direct response to any contamination left from the manufacturing period.
Can you just tell me some of as a project manager, what are some of the concerns when it's found that there's a potential problem with the ponds and the soils there? What's kind of like the fear there of just possible effects that it can have? Like, and why does it warrant a cleanup? Because if not, what can happen?
Our major concern is the carcinogenic effects of some of the DNT compounds and the TNT compounds. So that's the real health risk driver. We also are concerned about ecological effects, and we've did fish tissue sampling and everything in the ponds and determined that there's not an accumulation of the TNT or anything in the fish that would pose a health risk there or an ecological risk.
And the fish samples and the tissue samples that are taken, can you tell me why they're taking? Even though nothing's found, but like what are you looking for? Is it just that? Is it something that leads to just sickness of the fish, death of the fish? Why is that done?
Our major concern is protection of human health, so we wanted to sample the fish to ensure that there wasn't any accumulation of the TNT or the DNT in the fish, that if someone would eat those fish, that it would cause a potential health risk to them. Of course, then the second one is to the fish and the wildlife habitat itself.
And in the investigations that were there, can you tell me what was found? Were there any of those things evident in any of the fish that you came across? What was?
No, we haven't found anything in any of the wildlife at the site that would indicate any human health risk or ecological risk.
Can you talk to me about the pond 13 that had the red water, I guess is the way to describe it? Can you tell me just why that's kind of targeted? Is that a little more severe? What pond 13? What was going on?
Pond 13 is kind of targeted as a significant location because that was a point where a lady was fishing there, observed a redwater seep, and pointed that out to the wildlife biologist on site, Mr. Tom Dodson. And so he collected a sample, sent it to the lab, and determined that it did contain levels of TNT. And so that initiated the response to look and further investigate the site, and resulted in the site being placed on national priority list. The state nominated that site. They're allowed to nominate in the early process when the national priority list was first developed. They were allowed to nominate 2 sites, and that was one of their 2 sites in the state that they nominated for being placed on national priorities list for further investigation and cleanup.
And can you tell me things like DNT and TNT? What the fear is? Why is it cleaned up out of the environment?
Our major concerns with TNT and DNT being in the soil or groundwater is that it is a known carcinogenic or cancer-causing agent. So we want to ensure that that the human health's protected and the environment's protected as well.
Sure. So I didn't get a chance to look at it too much, but I was looking through, I guess, like the report from the site. Can you tell me, someone who, in looking at the report, what's in that report? What will people find if they browse through it?
I mean, what you would find is that the early concerns after the production period was the waste sewer lines, because there was potential for pieces of TNT to be left over in those sewer lines. So USACE, the U.S. Army Toxic and Hazardous Waste Agency, was tasked at that time to come in and excavate those sewer lines, and they actually use flamethrowers like you see in military actions and burn off all the excess TNT to ensure that there wasn't an explosion risk of TNT left on the site. And then we looked at the more significant areas of concern at that time, which was the red water, yellow water ponds, which had waste TNT in them, and an area in the manufacturing area called the washer flaker houses, which was kind of the last location of process and everything. So that's where the greatest contamination was spilled out onto the ground and then could migrate to the groundwater. So those areas were capped to protect any exposure to human health and environment and wildlife.
Can you tell me how many ponds are out on the site and how many were needed to be cleaned?
Okay, the ponds were not originally there. The majority of these ponds were created by West Virginia Department of Natural Resources after they received ownership of the property after the war. But I believe they have 32 ponds on the site right now. That series of ponds there, the 12, 13, 14, are the only ones I can think of that are really concerned. We had the other ones, the previous ones, the yellow water and red water reservoir, which were ponds that existed on site during the manufacturing facility. Those were drained and capped as part of the initial remediation or cleanup efforts.
The effects that it could have on people, not even really consuming these stuff, but just being in the immediate area. Were there any dangers then and now of just people kind of being in that immediate area?
From our studies and the risk assessments that we've conducted and everything, there isn't a risk to the daily site user or a hunter, a fisherman, or a worker visiting the site. The areas of concern immediately were capped, or the wastewater sewer lines were excavated and flamed. Now, if you were there prior to those actions happening, you had a greater chance of exposure, so it would give you a greater risk of cancer.
There's no immediate effects it would have on someone walking through that area in terms of just like causing a hallucination or something like that.
I'm not aware of any other side effect or potential effect that you would run into. You would have to have a direct exposure with a very high concentration of the TNT contamination to get any type of side effect, I believe, off of that. But nothing in terms of hallucinations or anything like that I'm aware of.
When a site like a TNT plant is closed and non-operational, what's the procedure when a plant like that closes?
Yeah. When they closed, and they went through a cleanup process for what they knew and technology was available at that time to clean up the site. At this property, they knew they couldn't clean up everything, so those areas that was thought to still pose a potential concern were transferred to the West Virginia DNR for wildlife management purposes, and that restriction was placed in that deed. The other areas outside of those that felt didn't pose any concern were accessed and sold off to private ownership.
What plays a factor into this specific case? Was it, first what we're dealing with, which is the manufacturing of TNT, but then also is it just the time period of when this was going on, just the procedures back then and precautions, things like that? Like if that plant was built now in 50 years, would we have the same problem or no?
If the plant was built now, of course, we would have a lot more stringent environmental controls on the way they operated, and there wouldn't be the releases to the soil and the groundwater like occurred during that time period. So obviously we would have less of a follow-on cleanup activity from a current day production. But during that time frame, obviously that didn't exist. So there was, spills and releases of the TNT into the soil and groundwater. And because of the potential to cause cancer, we are cleaning it up and want to ensure that we protect human health and environment.
And looking at this in a grand perspective, how big of a project is this? How many years does it take to clean up in a site like this, and how good can it be?
Yeah, we've been working on the site since the Corps of Engineers was designated lead agency on site in 1992. There was some initial efforts on that in the late 80s by the U.S. Army Agency for Toxic Materials, and they did some initial work on the site, but we've been working on it since then, and I believe in 94, 95, the groundwater extraction pump and treat system to clean up groundwater was built, and that was put in full production in 2000. And we estimate about a 25-year effort to clean up the groundwater on the site. So we expect to have some activity there at least to 2025.
Is there anything that you think I missed that's important with this whole part of the story I left out?
I think the Army Corps of Engineers has taken every opportunity and every precaution they can to ensure, protection of human health and the environment of the site. We're doing risk assessments on every area and ensuring that there is, no risk left remaining. We work closely with the State Department of Environmental Protection and US EPA Region 3 and have a very active partnership on that. And everyone's working together that the residents and users of that facility are protected and the wildlife there is protected.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.